A recent lawsuit between the South African Revenue Service, a company that entered a business bailout during an assessment, leaves legal experts scratching their heads over tax liabilities and when the tax officer thinks they should be established owed. According to Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr, the merits of the case concerned a company that filed its 2017 tax returns in a year it reported losses. SARS informed company that it would be audited, but the same company went into voluntary work recovery before audit was complete. Additional assessment by SARS ultimately revealed that the company owed over $8 million in taxes, payable by May 2018. However, at this point, the company had already begun commercial bailouts. SARS noted that although it was raised in April 2018, the 5 million rupees income tax claim is owed to initiate a pre-business bailout. Therefore, SARS would have to reclaim this debt in terms of its business recovery plan. However, any other money owed, equal to $3 million, was seen as an after-business recovery initial debt, and the tax office demanded it be paid by the company. SARS later argued that income tax for the 2017 tax year also becomes due and should be paid on May 31, 2018, when ditional assessment is complete because it is owed with post-initial debt. In other words, CHD claimed that the tax liability arises only when amount due under additional accrual is due and payable, which is May 31, 2018. On this basis, SARS argued that it constitutes a post-initial debt. The main issue revolves around the tax debt, which is defined as the amount that is due and payable in tax law as a law. The most important issue before court was whether income tax liability was due and payable before or after start of business recovery proceedings. On one hand, SARS argued that the debt becomes due and must be paid only when assessment is completed. On other hand, related company argued that assessment does not create tax liability and it is always owed, so it cannot be a post-initial debt. The assessment just quantified responsibility. It didn't create responsibility, she argued. To manage, the courts ultimately ruled in favor of SARS. Referring to Namibian court decisions, Judge on matter said that, in general, obligation to pay tax did not make tax payable before it was assessed. However, CDH said this raises some serious questions about the tax liability in South Africa, as more recent South African resolutions advocate opposite view. Most notably, in later SARS lawsuit against billionaire Christo Wiese, tax officer argued opposite of case he just won. In this case, companies involved claimed that they did not owe the tax liability claimed by SARS because it was not present at time of SARS assessment. Meanwhile, SARS argued that tax liability is always owed and does not need an assessment to determine it. As noted in previous tax warning, court in Wiese ruled that requiring an assessment before a tax liability arises would be unworkable, but would also castrate the original purpose of TAA as whole. For purposes of Chapter 183 of the Code, said CDH. While Wiese court had determined meaning what constitutes a tax liability in context of Article 183 TAA, court made it clear that SARS did not have to make an assessment to determine a tax liability under these circumstances. The court in Wiese noted that the debt exists regardless of whether the taxpayer or SARS made an assessment. CDH said that Wiese can be distinguished from most recent case on basis, among other things, that Wiese involved application of General Anti-Avoidance Rules and therefore interpretation of what constitutes it. Tax debt has been declared in this context. However, this was not clear in the last case. It is therefore regrettable that court did not refer to the Wiese case, which it could have done since Wiese was handed over several months before this case was heard, statement said. Whatever the outcome, there is now a lot of uncertainty about what constitutes a tax debt, and in what context. Where much needed clarity is sought in this area of tax law, it will be interesting to see if this case can be appealed to the higher courts. All details of the case can be read in Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr. Read SARS in the Sun.